right. Well, Mark, thanks for joining us. I'll do a quick intro. I'm James, founder of 17 Tech, and I'm here with Mark from Flowlie. They just came out of stealth mode and they're here to talk to us today about their startup. Mark, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Excited to chat today.
Awesome. Well, yeah, tell me a little bit about your background. Like, what roles did you have before starting your first startup?
Um, Short answer is none. Although I worked for a few nonprofits, volunteering and interning undergrad. But coming out of college, actually founded a company as my first job.
Very
Initially
cool.
joined technically as a business development associate and made the unusual path up to co-founder within about 6 months. So really ran with the idea. So that was my first kind of foray into entrepreneurship. And despite a lot of early challenges, definitely fell in love with it, and it shaped a lot of what was to come after that.
Tell me about that startup. What was that about? What were you guys working on?
It was a peer-to-peer real estate rental marketplace. So
Oh,
I like
interesting.
to joke, yeah, I like to joke is one of the toughest business models in one of the toughest, most old school industries. So
Yeah.
challenging in a multitude of respects. But the basic idea was to eliminate the middleman in markets like New York and San Francisco, where you pay exorbitant broker fees and the brokers add very little value. Uh,
Hmm.
Basically, just unlocking an apartment for you and then asking for that $5,000, $6,000 check. And our solution was to create a place where outgoing tenants, people who are moving out of their apartments, could source their replacement through, college and friend networks and get paid a much smaller fee for doing so and show the apartment themselves, etc., creating kind of more, greater efficiencies, but also just a better experience.
That's awesome. Yeah, the New York market's crazy. Like I when I moved there, we had to pay a broker that we never met for an apartment that they didn't even tour us in. So it's a crazy process. So it's actually a pretty good problem you're trying to solve.
Yeah, it's wild and it's a completely broken system. Brokers are very shady for the most part. Don't want to generalize too much here, but at least in places like New York. Um, but what we quickly kind of found out was unless you get the property managers looped in with the right incentives, there's not much incentive for them to change behavior. If brokers are filling apartments and have been for 3 decades, it's going to take a lot to sort of change behavior for very old school actors that are used to doing things kind of pen and paper, and don't want to necessarily embrace technology or change.
Yeah. Any lessons that you learned from that like startup? Any like takeaways that came from that journey?
Yeah, I mean, t tons of them. And it really led to my next startup in the sense that I sought out an opportunity with a company that had a lot of things that mine had been missing. I would say one pretty simple one is it's really hard to execute that kind of business model in any industry, let alone in an industry where you have limited knowledge or expertise or relationships. For me, I thought the problem resonated with me so much because I'd experienced the problem myself, and I had talked to many friends and family members, all who had experienced it, and thought, wow, that's a really good idea. That's a huge problem that I think it's really cool if you disrupt that kind of status quo. But the problem was having to build all of those relationships from scratch and try to build trust in a industry again that's very slow moving, slow to adopt new technology. We were sort of handicapped from the beginning. So that was one of the things that the next company I joined had a highly regarded executive from, in that case, the hospitality industry who had worked at, corporate strategy at one of the biggest hospitality companies in the world And that just adds
Wow.
so much legitimacy, let alone kind of, connections and brings relationships to the table. Otherwise, without those things, it's really hard to execute.
Absolutely. Yeah, tell me about this next. So after you finished this, you were there for how many months or how many years were you at the first startup?
About a year and a half.
Okay,
So,
cool.
yeah,
So then
good
after
good bit
that,
of
you
time.
segue to this next one, and then when did you start that?
Yeah, so I started there in I guess it was the fall of 2015,
Okay.
and I sought out this company. So at this point, I basically knew startups were for me. I really enjoyed building and creating. Um, and one of the things I'd struggled with, I was focused on business development and partnerships and distribution at the first company, but I was really uncomfortable selling.
Mm,
I found it very unnatural. I found it hard to um, get in front of the right people and kind of run a tight process and say the right things and move people through a funnel. But also like put myself out there. It's just a difficult thing in sales. But I knew it was something that if I wanted to be a founder again, I would have to master. And also that,
yeah,
through speaking with people in my network, I learned that sales was one of those things. It's going to serve you well in life no matter what you do after that. So that's why I decided to kind of pursue sales roles within tech companies, staying in the New York ecosystem, and came across this great company, Triptease, that pivoted a few times. I just brought a new product to market. Super small, early stage company headquartered in the UK. So the New York office was basically one of the founders and a couple other people,
wow,
and ended up spending 5 years there. Wearing many different hats, all related to sales and revenue generation, and saw the company grow from 10 or 15 people to 150,
wow.
with a lot of challenges, and a lot of downs, but a lot of ups as well. Like really got to see how a company scales over time. So that was an incredible experience.
That's really cool. So you went from like a very small team to about sounds like just a few to seeing it being part of a team that grew to like 150. And I think kind of what you said about the sales role is really important because like when you start to be a founder, you're selling to everybody. You're trying to convince team members to
Yeah.
join you. You're trying to convince customers to believe in you. You're trying to convince investors to invest in you. Like there's no angle where you're not selling. So I think that's awesome that you like challenge yourself to try that role. So that's the role you did at
Yeah.
that startup, correct?
Yeah, exactly. And it was extremely painful, the sales at first. Like I always joke about it, but it's very true. The founder and CEO was very, very close to letting me go because he had moved to New York for the company, and we were basically it must have been like a 10 by 10 foot office in a WeWork. And I was just pitching on the phone all day, and he was hearing my pitch and just like rolling his eyes. It was just not very good. So I really had to work hard at it and put myself out there. I started recording every single cold call I made, and I would listen back to them at the end of every day. Um, but sales is that great thing where if you put in the work, it's hard not to improve, right? Like it's
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
can start to learn the tricks and how to build relationships and run a good process. So it was
It's just
incredibly
repetition.
rewarding.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
That's awesome. So then after that, you it sounds like you got into VC or was there a few companies and roles in between then?
So I left Triptease kind of mid 2020 and
Okay.
went to get my MBA. So that was kind of the break. And at that point, um, part of going to get the MBA was I was a peace and conflict studies major in college. So I didn't take a single accounting class, econ class. That stuff just really didn't interest me at the time. I wish it had. It definitely is difficult to run a business without a business background. So I felt like, again, having ambitions to be a founder again, I needed to really get the basics down. And I also had seen both my brothers go through MBA programs and come out the other side with incredibly enriching opportunities and really strong networks. So I went to the University of Virginia, and that's sort of where I had an opportunity to dabble in venture within a few different firms. So kind of ended up falling into it. I didn't necessarily go into the MBA expecting to make that pivot, but it was more opportunistic than anything.
Yeah.
Um, I think kind of realized getting on the other side of the table, you get to see a breadth of companies and founders and leadership styles and cultures that if you're working for a single startup, you just don't get that same breadth of experience. So for me, it was really
Yeah.
an opportunity to study entrepreneurship from a viewpoint that I hadn't necessarily had already, which was really cool.
Yeah, from the other side of the table. So, do you feel like that kind of armed you to at least observe many startups, so then you can have enough knowledge to jump back in head first on the operator side?
I would say more than anything, it was motivation to get back to the startup side because and it was incredibly enriching from and educational, and I did enjoy the work. But the biggest takeaway for me was being around people who are, some of the hardest working, grittiest people on earth, kind of the 1% who are willing to risk everything to make their dream happen, to execute on their vision. It's hard not to get excited about the vision too. And the tricky thing is, as an investor, you spend a lot of time with those people, and then it varies firm by firm, but there is a sort of point at which it's passed off, especially as a junior member. You don't stay as involved as you might like with some of those companies. So for me, it
Yeah,
was kind of it was a very enriching experience, but also motivated me to get back to that side. It was definitely something I missed.
that's awesome. Yeah, I want to ask you a few questions about your time in VC, just for like the founder out there. Like, what to you makes a good VC investor? Like, as now being a startup founder,
Yeah,
what do you look for, and what's a good investor to you?
yeah. I think in terms of what we look for on the startup side, there's it's kind of just like walking the walk almost. Is that the right phrase or walking the talk?
I think
Whatever it
walking the
is.
walk. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. There's definitely a lot of noise about like, value add, being a value add investor and going to work for your portcos and being there for your founders. And I think it's pretty easy. Like talk is cheap. It's pretty easy to say that during the diligence process, but the VCs that are really talented and truly value add are those who can um, get their hands dirty and not necessarily, execute on anything, but be a shoulder to lean on, kind of provide the advice, provide the support when needed. And in particular, like I have a particular allegiance to those who have been operators before, who have like been in the arena, right? Have been through hell and
Mhm.
back, have seen companies, their companies on the brink of failure and actually seen them through those trying times. You can just come at those conversations with a totally different perspective once you've gone through that. So that's really important. And then uh, in general, a huge value add for any investor is being able to, well, having a super strong network and being able to open up that network to the
Okay.
founders that they work with. So that's also a really key component. And then I think a third thing is positioning founders for fundraising. So putting them in a position again through the network, but also through kind of preparation where that founder is in a good place to raise their next round is really important.
That's awesome. And on the flip side, like, what makes a good startup to an investor?
Yeah, I mean there's so many things that you could talk about here. The one that I always start with is the team, and in some ways it's intangibles. Um, but I guess an easy place to start is looking at the team and their cumulative experiences and understanding how those experiences led them to today and led them to this opportunity and why they have an unfair advantage to execute against that opportunity. I
Mhm.
think that that's really important. And as I mentioned, having deep experience and kind of uh, knowledge of the space that they're in is going to be extremely important. Um, and then there's the more intangible, like having the grittiness. Like, do we feel that this particular team, this particular founder is going to go the distance, is going to make something work no matter what challenge
Mhm.
is thrown their way. Um, that's always kind of top of mind for me.
That's awesome. So making sure they're willing to get into the trenches and can actually push through. So it's like kind of see soft skills about a founder that when you were on the other side, you were looking to see if they would be willing to go the extra mile and actually like push through. So it was a lot about personality, it seems like as well.
Yeah, and this is coming from the perspective of early stage, startups in particular, because there's so little data to go off of. So, obviously you need to be solving a big enough problem that's venture scalable, venture backable. You need to have a path to sustainable competitive advantages, and we look at those things very carefully. But since there's very little financial data to go off of, ultimately the biggest factor in whether that startup can get to past the point where 90% of startups fail um, is, it's going to come down to the dynamic of the team and the determination of the team, really.
Yeah. Were there any KPIs that you looked for in those early stages for startups? Like any metrics you wanted them to hit or see before you were actually willing to write a check?
Mm, not really. Yeah, I mean it's totally dependent on the business model and the industry, so no one silver bullet. I would
Hmm.
say always kind of engagement and retention over, pure revenue. But even that, like in the earliest stages, if you're kind of working with a prototype and recently post product, like your product's not going to have like the best engagement and retention metrics. But that's certainly a start showing that you're solving a problem that people really care about. I think it more comes down to understanding the customer journey within the space, speaking with customers and getting their insight into like why they use the platform, what they see, um, what the status quo looks like in terms of the customer journey and how this company is addressing that and changing that, flipping it on its head. I think it's like more um, those kinds of things rather than a metrics driven analysis.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, it sounds like there's not a lot of, like you said, metrics in the early days to actually really base things off of. So a lot of it seems to be like relying on the founder and the team and their past experience to actually get things done.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, for
very
sure.
cool. So how did this time like lead to Flowlie? Like when you were in VC, did you see any opportunity in the market that led to Flowlie? Like how did this kind of come about?
Yeah, good question. I can't take credit for coming up with the idea. And I was a late joiner to the Flowly mission, coming in about a year and a half into the product being developed. Vlad, Gio, my co-founders, and the engineering team, the founding team there, have been basically working nights and weekends for a few
Mm,
years now, and we just recently took it, full time. But the problem really stemmed from Vlad's experience working for a number of different um, venture firms, syndicating, working as an angel investor and LP in funds. And the realization ultimately was that uh, on the investor side, the average investor, uses, 10 to 15 different tools to run their investment process, and none of them speak with one another. So there's no actual um, analytics layer for venture. Very few funds even understand what are the universe of deals that they're seeing in a given year. And but how can they kind of improve outcomes using the data that they're collecting? So that was kind of the genesis in realizing, wow, there's an opportunity here to build something that can give a more unifying view of a investor's kind of entire process. On the founder side, because we also build tools for founders, the problem that we're solving there is very simple, and it's one of the reasons why Flowlie resonated with me so much when I first spoke to Vlad about it, was because I had experienced the problem so uh, deeply myself, and that is that fundraising is an incredibly difficult job. It's one
Yeah.
that it's like sales, it's a numbers game. It's going to require a ton of activity and a ton of work and reaching out to hundreds and hundreds of people. But it's also not going to be uh, a desired outcome if you don't personalize and if you don't really care to every single detail and every single touch point and conversation. And those two things are sort of incongruent because it's a numbers game. How do you personalize at scale? And what we realized was there really isn't anything out there to help founders scale their fundraising outreach and use data to understand what's working and what's not and how to improve. So that, from a personal perspective, is a huge pull for me working at Flowly. Uh, every venture-backed company has to fundraise, and it takes those founders away from their core day-to-day jobs, right? So how do we kind of unlock or return some of that time and make sure that they have the tools to achieve this absolutely mission critical kind of function?
Yeah, you said a few interesting things there. One of them I kind of noted down, which is like the personalized side, right? Where
Yeah,
just to give you like a quick example, I right now like I do some mentorship at Techstars, so I guess I fall under the category on LinkedIn as like venture capital and private equity when you like filter. And so I'm starting to get like these kind of spammy messages from founders who are doing like mass like CRM outreach for investment. And I'm looking at this like
yeah.
there's no way you can like put like hi first name and get somebody's attention. There's no shot that's possible, but like how do you suggest like founders personalize things? Like what's the best way to do it? Because it is kind of a sales job, but it's really hard, right? You have to do a ton of outreach, and I guess you got to stay away from these spammy messages. Or is that a good approach to treat it like full sales outreach?
Yeah, I mean, I was just doing this earlier today. I reach out to uh, 50 funds, and it took me about 5 hours because I
Wow.
personalize every single one of those messages because it's just not worth blasting out trash to, to 50 people who you hope to have as a customer one day, who a single bad email could turn off permanently from your brand, right?
Yeah.
So it's really difficult, but you just have to create a process where you go through sort of the first layer. Is there any sort of connection? Is there any intro path? Do we have any overlapping interests or experiences? And then from there, understand in the fundraising context, obviously, like what is their, it's not too hard to tell kind of what's their sweet spot, what stage do they invest at, and you really have to be careful qualifying those leads to make sure that every single person that you're reaching out to, this type of message that you're sending will resonate. When it comes to personalization, you can send the same template to those 50 people, but you need to personalize 2 to 3 sentences to each person, showing that you've done your research. And it's not the actual personalization that takes time, it's the research, right? It's figuring out what those commonalities are and what will add value, what will capture their attention, um, versus all the other stuff that they get on a daily basis.
So you're really like digging deep and like you said, seeing if there's a connection, finding like a natural path before you kind of like do the customizable email type thing.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I also go into this knowing um, from experience that there might be people I try reaching out to for the next 3 years who I don't get in touch with, and on the 25th time I'm reaching out, I finally get them, and it's possible that they've read every single email or text, voicemail, that entire time, and they actually appreciated the insights I was passing along. Like I've literally had people tell me that, like, oh yeah, like I would always read your email because you would send like an interesting article over that was relevant to my job, right? And like it's not going
Wow.
to return immediately 100% of the time, but if you play that game, like you will convert a certain percentage today, and over time you'll be able to get in front of more of those decision makers. So you do have to play the long game instead of being greedy and sending it, I actually get a lot of these. I get targeted nonstop now by um, sales automation teams who are like, we can help you reach 1,000 prospects in 24 hours. Like, I don't want to do that because then I'm sending complete shit to, to 1,000 prospects and basically shooting myself in the foot for the future.
You're diluting the brand. You're turning people off. Yeah. And so if you ever do meet them naturally, they already have like this idea of you in their head that you might not be able to undo. So really
Yeah,
interesting. That's cool how you spend so much time like going through that and you're really diligent about it too.
yeah, it's
Oh,
painful. It takes a lot of time, but it's worth it. And obviously, warm intros are always going to be more effective. So always lean on those when I can. I always pick up the phone and call anytime I can if I can find a number. People, are generally like salespeople are nervous to make calls and bother someone on the phone. In my experience, busy professionals way prefer that than getting just another email in their inbox
yeah.
that they're probably, not going to get to, and it's probably one of 100. Like they'd rather just hear from you on the phone and be able to figure out in 30 seconds on the phone as they're doing something else, is this worth my time?
Yeah, absolutely. And I heard you mention Vlad a few times. I know Vlad, but maybe some people who are listening don't know who Vlad is. How tell me about Vlad. How did you guys meet and how did you know he was the right co-founder for you?
Yeah, um, great question. So we met at Fuel Venture Capital here in Miami. Vlad has spent about 5 years working with various venture firms and investing himself. He started in platform operations and moved into investing roles. So very experienced investor. He's been a part of over 100 deals, and he's led a dozen or so himself. And we started on the same day actually at the VC firm that we worked at here in Miami. So first thought was, wow, his mustache is way more elaborate than mine is,
That was my first
and
thought too.
I felt like, shit, I better shave it off. Just embarrassing being next to him. But what more seriously, very quickly, Vlad struck me as a highly intelligent person with just a great energy about him, and we really hit it off just in terms of our mutual intellectual curiosity, our love for learning new things, and we would really kind of lean on each other to discuss like new topics, what was happening in the market, what deals we had looked at, trying to get each other's insights from past experiences, which is what kind of told me, when he approached me about joining the team, well, first of all, we had already worked together, so it is a little bit easier, but I knew that we would be um, great as co-founders because I knew that we're both very honest with each other, intellectually curious, able and willing to lean on each other's expertise. And that's kind of everything that you want in a
Yeah.
co-founder, to just be able to be like 100% transparent 100% of the time, and also be with someone who's going to work just as hard, if not harder, than you do. And that's one thing about Vlad as well. he's just got that grit and determination. So a lot of the how I evaluated Flowly was how I would evaluate a startup I was considering investing in. It was just that level of diligence times like 50 because I diligenced it over a like 3 to 6 month period, um, and met the entire team and attended calls and really like dove into the fundamentals of the business before making the leap. So it's also a good lesson if you have the ability to build a relationship with the team beforehand. It makes it a lot easier to know whether or not, you guys are going to work together well.
Yeah, I love how you took that approach too, because like you're not just investing capital, you're investing your time, energy, and focus, right? So, and this is your career. So, I love that you kind of took that
Yeah.
approach, and you're like, no, I'm going to sniff these guys out for like 3 to 6 months before I jump in headfirst into anything.
Yeah, it's just so much more high stakes than an investment is, frankly.
Yeah, yeah,
It's putting a ton on the line, and your time is your most valuable uh, resource, right? So yeah,
yeah.
is definitely important to me.
And it sounds like in the early days, Vlad and the team, and even you, I think you did jump in first full time out of anybody, or maybe there was a couple engineers first. But it sounds like Vlad and some of the and you as well were partially part time. How did you guys manage that in the beginning, being part time founders? It's a question I get a lot from early stage startups who are like, trying to figure out, do I leave my full time job and dive into this MVP, or do I use my full time job to maybe fund my startup in the beginning? So, just curious on how you guys manage that, and if you have any tips for founders who are in that stage.
Yeah. So I went in straight full time, straight to full time. So it's harder for me to speak to the experience, but obviously Vlad and the rest of the team, Vlad, Gio, and the engineers, um, they had done it for and have done it basically for 2 years. And for them, it's made a lot trickier by the fact that there are it's a team of immigrants, so there are,
Hmm.
visa considerations and um, much bigger implications in terms of like employment than
Wow.
there are for a naturalized American citizen. So um, for them, it really just goes to show how passionate they are about what we're building, because these are people who work at Fortune 500 companies and really intense jobs, already putting in 60 to 80 hours per week. And then they hop on and start working on Flowly from 9 p.m., usually until 1 a.m., often much
Wow.
later than that. And then they spend their weekends working on it. So it's pretty amazing. And I can't speak directly to the trade-offs between full versus part-time. I think our team in particular, they're all very eager to come full time. Um, but it's just kind of a sacrifice that you have to be willing to make to do two jobs at once, because
Yeah.
it's a lot to balance. For sure.
Yeah.
You just ultimately have to have that passion for what you're doing, belief in the vision, and the willingness to see it through.
It sounds like they broke up their days into like mini days. So it'd be like, the regular 9 to 5, then maybe from 5 to 9 again was like family time. So taking care of anything around the house if they have families, significant others. But then they starting their second workday at 9 p.m. to 1 or even later. That's kind of crazy. So they sounds like they time blocked a lot of their day in order to get this done.
Yeah, absolutely. And the one thing it's a little bit crazy, but it's kind of nice too. Like Vlad and I mimic that pattern as well now, because
Oh,
once
nice.
once everyone else comes online, that's when we're able to unlock certain things that have been blocked, and collaborate with the team. So every Wednesday our all hands is from 9:30 p.m. till midnight. It's amazing how quickly you adjust to that though. And I actually
Yeah.
find it's a really nice cadence, because you have the normal work day, you're able to kind of unwind for 3, 4 hours, and then you kind of get this second rush, and you're able to sort of plug back in. It's definitely not easy at first. It takes a little getting
Yeah.
used to.
A little bit of a messed up sleep cycle, but you figure it out.
Yeah, exactly.
That's great. Um, no, that's awesome. I appreciate that insight. I think a lot of people think about that. I know when I like mentor a lot of early stage accelerators, like that's a giant question that they always have. But
Yeah.
I would love to like dive a little bit deeper into like the actual product now. So like you guys, it sounds like the main product is really like this data room, right? And you observe that from being in the VC world, and it sounds like Vlad was building this a little bit beforehand as well. But how big of a problem is this for the startup space? Like how many startups in the industry go through this problem and need this solution?
Yeah. The short answer is it's a massive problem. I mean, hundreds of thousands of founders, in the US alone, and it's um, it's kind of surprising that there isn't more out there to support founders with their fundraise. But I think the reason why is what is out there is tools that are really designed for a sales process being repurposed for
Mm-hmm.
fundraising. And then the other big category is marketplaces. So, platforms that connect founders with investors. So they help
Mm-hmm.
with kind of that investor discovery, which is important. But one of the insights that we had early on was that most marketplaces fail because they attract the wrong types of founders and the wrong types of investors. And there's typically this um, quality issue. Uh, Let alone there's also, of course, a chicken and egg problem that most marketplaces suffer from. So we wanted to build something that would um, not necessarily facilitate new connections between investors and founders, but actually elevate the fundraising experience and start to automate a lot of the process while surfacing insights from the data that we're able to collect on both investors and founders. So really what we've built is a platform vertically designed for VC-backed startups. The core product right now is a single secure link that, when shared with an investor, passes on uh, a, a series of data from that company, including their deck, the backgrounds of the founders, company info, the legal entity, the current round that they're raising, and the economic terms. And from there, the founder can update that profile at any time, and those changes will be pushed live to every investor who has access to that profile. So what that does is it creates a single source of truth from which the founder can actually manage their fundraising process. And we also, at the same time, designed a product for investors. It's a little counterintuitive because, again, we're not a marketplace. So you would think
Mm-hmm.
immediately, oh, you're connecting those two parties. Um, we're not, but what we do is we provide workflows similarly for investors to use a platform for deal screening, for deal sharing, basically for managing their pipeline. And because of that, they give us information on their investment thesis, what stage they invest at, the industry, their past investments, their experience, etc. All of that information can be surfaced to founders. So as they're speaking with investors, they can figure out who's the best fit for their particular company. And of course, they can see like how engaged that investor is with their materials, what they're going through, how much time they're spending, all of that kind of stuff. Where we're taking this is using the data that we collect from both sides to um, power more efficient founder to investor communication. So being able to automatically personalize emails at scale based on who an investor is, where they are in your pipeline, and what they've engaged with. That's kind of the core idea of how we can scale personalized outreach.
That's awesome. So it sounds like on both sides, you're actually able to learn from the data that startups upload and also learn a lot about the VC and kind of help them not tailor their material, but at least show what percentage, maybe some of the criteria, check marks that how similar you are to, or how good of a fit you are for X VC that you're about to speak to, or something like that.
Yeah, yeah, a lot of it's about closing the feedback loop and um, once the information's all out there and you have a single source of truth, you can be more transparent about where the what's a fit, what's not, and kind of move on with your day, right? Instead of right now, I'm fundraising and I send my deck to 100 people and it just goes off into the ether and I'm not really sure
Mm.
uh, you know, there's no sort of feedback point after that. So we're encouraging both parties to share the right information with each other at the right time, and then feeding insights to both parties so that they know how to proceed, so that they're not wasting time pursuing, dead ends.
Yeah. I think it's smart that you guys are also building tools for VCs because they'll also get very familiar with the tool and it won't be like a foreign link when a startup founder does send it out to them and they actually know what they're looking at, right? So I think it's great for you guys for user adoption. You're getting kind of both sides familiar with your product. And so hopefully that helps with like user adoption and even
For
referrals
sure.
for
Yeah,
customer onboarding.
it's actually a huge advantage. As you can imagine, what tools investors use really plays a big role and dictates kind of what tools founders are willing to use. And for investors, it's kind of amazing, but right now the vast majority they're just not tracking analytics on the deals that come through their pipeline. So they have no visibility into what they see in a given year, what types of companies they tend to take first calls with, what companies they passed on
Wow.
due to timing but are interested in. Um, all of that, if you're not using Flowly, is typically maintained in a CRM, which is
Mm-hmm.
dependent on the investor remembering certain details, remembering to update all the data, and hoping that the data is up to date and accurate. Instead, we've created a system where the founder is constantly providing that to the investor, right? So it sort of solves this issue of kind of stale and bad data within venture, and that's the reason why a lot of investors don't have analytics on their process because they just don't have the right data. It all kind of comes down to that. So data is at the crux of the problem for both sides. Um, but yeah,
That'd be cool if they could like learn from. It sounds like they're going to be able to learn from, um, like a lot of the first calls, second calls, whoever, right? So maybe they can get more efficient over time. Maybe they're wasting a lot of time in a certain criteria that's a little bit outside their thesis. So I think that's awesome that you provide that. And you also mentioned something that, um, like when you're using a CRM, which is what they're using now, that's a sales tool, right? Like they're
yeah,
not using something designed for this process. They're using HubSpot or Close.com, which is meant for sales. So, um, yeah, it sounds like there's just
absolutely.
like no real tools built for this market.
Yeah, and then if you think about, venture investing is a highly collaborative business. So whether you're an angel, a syndicate, or even a fund, you have hundreds of co-investors, as you're aware. Every one of those entities is probably using some different combination of tools, a different CRM, with their own data, even though let's say they all have the same five companies in their CRM, right? The details of that company are going to be different across those five CRMs because they're inputted by the individual venture investors. So there's no consistency across systems that investors use. And that creates a lot of problems when you're trying to collaborate and co-invest with one another. So another thing that we provide is basically deal sharing through Flowly, where you can collaborate on deals and share the right and accurate information with all of the relevant parties. And that's just something that's not been possible previously. Again, because each party has its own closed system CRM, whereas Flowly is an open system that's constantly, being refreshed and updated.
That's awesome. So no more dead links, it sounds like too.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So you can't, go on there and discover a new startup, but if, Vlad, who I co-invest with quite frequently sends me a deal on Flowlie, I'm going to know I'm getting the most up-to-date information instead of, you know, putting that information in bits and pieces into my CRM in whatever kind of template I have set up.
That's awesome. And I feel like a lot of pre MVP startup founders might not know all the like documents they need in that data room. You mentioned a few, but what are all the documents that like a founder would need? Maybe pre-seed, and then maybe is there a different set of documents that you would need for your Series A that you could rattle off the top of your head, or are they pretty similar to what you mentioned?
Yeah, so it's not necessarily a data room in the sense that like the way that we think about a data room is when you're in late stages, progressive diligence, right? So kind of
Hmm.
you've had a first call, you've had a second call, you've met the relevant parties on the investment team, and then you're sharing a data room, which is going to include likely a financial model, product roadmap, more information about the team, the cap table, those types of documents which are necessary to kind of check off before, yeah, signing off on that investment. Um, what we include in Flowly is first and foremost the deck. And the idea behind Flowly is really like give each investor all of the information that they would need prior to taking a first call to know if one, this is a good fit for them, two, is this interesting, and three, the information that they can then go into the call prepared and ready to ask the questions that really matter, dig into the areas of concern or that are unclear to them. Um, so that really comes down to like providing the deck, providing information on the founder backgrounds, the legal entity, like how long the company's been going, financial traction, customer acquisition, retention, all of these things. It doesn't go you don't want to go too in depth on the financials, but basically give an overall picture of like what the business model is, who the customers are, what stage the company is at, and who's behind the company.
That's great. That's great. Do you have any competitors in the space that you're eyeing, or do you guys feel like you're kind of a first mover in this industry?
Yeah, so definitely have competitors. DocSend on the deck sharing is kind of the obvious one. They're of course a horizontal player, so really our core competency is focusing on venture-backed startups and designing this for founders and for investors. So we're able to do a lot of things that DocSend, frankly, will never be able to do. Um,
Mhm.
on on the investor side, there are certainly some kind of syndication platforms, some as I mentioned, a lot of marketplaces, but they're generally tools that kind of help with the process of, okay, this deal is coming in. I have 50 co-investors who I want to share it with. Um, I'll share it on this platform, and then we can all vote on, who likes the deal and who doesn't. Um, where where Flowly differs there is, again, we're going the route of first party data. So
Mhm.
having the founder input those details is absolutely critical to the accuracy of that information. And the tools that we're able to build on top of that data, um, it's just a different ball game versus some of those other platforms. So everything we've built
Mhm.
is with kind of data infrastructure in mind and thinking about what are the analytics we could run, what's the benchmarking that we can run to show a startup how their growth compares, how their valuation compares to cohorts, how much dilution they should think about taking on, should they look at and consider taking on debt instead of equity. Those types of decisions are, you know, really important ones, and they can only be made when you're looking at and comparing the right data sets. So that's really what
Yeah.
sets us apart, and that's what we're building towards. We've sort of put all the plumbing in and the infrastructure in to build on top of that data platform.
That's awesome. And what tools or features are you trying to build next? Are you able to share that?
Yeah. So one example is we sort of stumbled upon this, but there are a lot of communities of investors. Some are affiliated with universities, some are affiliated with accelerator programs or funds. Some might just be syndicates, and there's a real need to organize their investor networks, and that's a core competency of Flowlie. You can basically invite everyone within a community to the Flowlie platform. They take 3 minutes to onboard and basically enter some information about what their investment thesis is. And that's hugely valuable for community because right now they're trying to do that in Google Sheets or Airtable, and that information's constantly changing. So when a deal comes in and you have 500 investors in your network, like how do you figure out who to send that to?
Mm.
You're probably going to just do it off the top of your head and maybe like, look through Airtable and try to find the right people. But Flowly can facilitate that in a much kind of smarter and more efficient way. So we're currently building some community functionality that will further unlock those types of use cases, which can be really valuable to investor communities.
That's fantastic. Yeah, it sounds like for like an angel syndicate, you and where there's a bunch of LPs, you might be able to kind of route that deck or all that data about a new startup to the proper LP instead of someone having to manually go through their Airtable, find the right people, shoot off an email, things like that.
Yeah, exactly. And being able to one click see, for a particular deal, what Flowly will recommend. Here are the 10 people you should send this deal to right now. And I mean, you can literally send it in one click to those people. So it's a huge time savings, especially like these like facilitators or syndicators. A lot of their time is just spent on sending those intros and finding the right people. So if you can, um, systematize that process, there's a lot of value there.
Absolutely. Yeah, I feel like every time we chat, you guys are making like so much more progress. Is there any like major milestone you're trying to accomplish by the end of the year? Like anything on the product side or on just the business side as a whole that you're trying to knock down before we uh, hit the end of the year?
Yeah, so we're kind of in the midst of our a public launch. So we were in closed beta until about a month ago. We opened the beta up to the public, meaning anyone can sign up through the website now. The next step is monetizing, which Stripe integration is pretty easy to execute on. What's a little bit more difficult is figuring out which features belong in which tier. And one thing that we're committed to is always maintaining a free version of the product for both founders and investors. It's really critical and a big part of kind of our ethos that we want to make sure that founders always are able to access our product. And likewise, angel investors who are vastly underserved in this market by existing providers, we want to make sure that they're not priced out of our solution. So there's some functionality that will remain free, but figuring out with the more premium features how to gate it, whether to gate on usage or strictly on the actual features themselves or how much information is shown. Um, that's a process we're working through right now, and then we'll be rolling out those paid tiers and um, have almost 2,000 users at this point. So it'll be interesting to see
Wow.
the breakdown of conversion into those different buckets. But that's sort of the big push right now.
That's awesome. So yeah, it sounds like yeah, monetization, figuring out the right way to charge. That's a big one that a lot of founders go through, right? Like yeah, like you said, usage, or you could have people unlock additional features, but then you also have to measure how important each feature is
Yeah,
and figure out what's of value. So that's really cool.
yeah,
Where do you see Flowly in like 5 years? Oh, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
yeah. I was just gonna say, I think like luckily we very much take the mindset that we'll just keep iterating and we'll likely make a lot of wrong decisions. So We won't overthink it. We'll get this thing rolled out in the next few weeks, but it's always so interesting to see go in with your hypotheses and then actually find out like where is the value being driven and what drives certain behaviors. Um,
Are you communicating with your customers about this? Like, are you asking them every time you roll out a feature, or how are you kind of opening up that feedback loop?
yeah, Vlad and I have probably done over 200 calls with users
Wow.
and prospective users. So not all currently, on the Flowlie platform, but that's, over the last 4 or 5 months. So it's been a huge push to understand the customer journey and what would be most beneficial and drive the most value for those customers. So that's a huge part of our strategy. We're very much doing the things that don't scale over and over and over again, and we'll continue to do so. You know, until I mean, for the lifetime of the company, but especially during this time as we're kind of rolling out pricing, I think it'll be important to kind of continue that work.
Yeah. If you guys are following YC's advice, you're going to be just fine. So that's great that you're doing things that don't scale.
Yeah.
Um, so where do you see Flowly in 5 years? Like, what would a good outcome be for you guys in 5 years, and like, what would you want this to become?
Yeah. So in 5 years, I would want to see us serving tens of thousands of founders and investors um, all over the world. We're already in 55 countries, which is like
Wow.
shocking. With zero marketing spend, that's completely organic growth, which is very cool to see that expansion across the globe. So I have no doubt that we'll be even more global in 5 years.
That's
Um,
incredible.
yeah, yeah, very cool. And I would say on the founder side, 5 years from now, w we will be um, that full kind of end-to-end fundraising enhancement platform where founders go to really scale their fundraising process, right? And to understand um, how their business compares to other companies in given cohorts. So using the platform also as an analytics and benchmarking platform, as well as an intelligence one to help them make better decisions. On the investing side, the world's very much moving towards data-driven investing, um, and there are AI funds who are raising billions of dollars. Um, a lot of the larger funds we speak with have data scientists and engineers on staff already, but 99% of investors can't necessarily afford to do that, right? So um, it's kind of this pivotal moment where we really want to be at the forefront of driving data-driven investing for the masses, for the angel investors and the smaller funds who can't necessarily afford the same resources as the large AUM funds. And
Mhm.
that's really our goal to be at the forefront of that behavior where 70% of the analysis of a deal is executed by our platform automatically before, even taking the first call. That's kind of where we want to get.
That would be amazing. Yeah, you don't have to field 3, 4 calls before you get any data. You are opening up that link, and you're only looking at the ones that are qualified for you. That'd be pretty incredible.
Yeah, yeah. So a lot of work to get there, but it's an exciting future. It's very much the way that the world is moving, and we've seen a shift in how smaller funds talk about it, realizing that this is the future. There's no escaping it, and they need to be looking at solutions today, which definitely feels validating and like we're on the right track.
Were you surprised? I don't know if this is valid, but do you find that some VCs are kind of winging it, or like without any data? And if so, were you surprised by that?
Surprised, no, but it's definitely the case. There's a huge range in terms of VC like investment process. I was a little bit surprised by some of the bigger funds not even, tracking every deal that comes through the front door.
Mm,
But it is a tricky thing to do. Again, because like the whole manual data entry thing, that it's just not a viable model. And nothing else that's been put out into the market has really been effective in driving adoption. Like there are a lot of portfolio reporting um, companies out there that will work with a fund and they ask the startups to connect their data sources and then they can feed that data back to investors. First of all, that's post investment. So it's going to be a very small subset of the total deals that VC saw in a given year. But second of all, we've heard anecdotally that only about 20 to 30% of companies will actually comply with a solution like that because
oh
incentives
well.
aren't really aligned. So um, yeah, not necessarily surprised. It's a very difficult problem to solve. But at the same time, people are definitely realizing like it does need to be solved now, right? Like steps need to be taken to make sure that appropriate analysis is being conducted um, on their investment process.
Yeah, it sounds. I feel like we're seeing more and more articles about VCs kind of getting caught with their pants down about some founder who committed some type of fraud. Do you see that as part of this process, right? Like making sure that I don't know if it's fully falls under like due diligence, but like, do you think having access to this data would help prevent that?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely doesn't hurt creating more transparency and insight, especially pre-funding. Um, the caveat is there are always sort of bad actors. There are significantly more bad actors when money is flowing fast and free, like it was, in 2020, 2021.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, that's definitely the hope that we can create more transparency around the markets and enable investors to uh, check those boxes, right, and not cut corners. But ultimately, it's also kind of down to the investor committing to doing the diligence.
Very true. Very true. They have to read the data. They have to actually look through it. So
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
This is not your first rodeo, obviously, but have there been any major lessons about this venture compared to like previous ventures that were surprising to you or no, or noteworthy?
Um, yeah, I would say, I mean, n nothing like nothing like unique springs to mind, but like some general lessons I've learned in the past have definitely been reinforced.
Mm,
What one is just like always surround yourself by people who are smarter than you. That's just always the best thing that you can do. It's very much where I feel like my place is at Flowlie. It's a remarkable group of people, and that just motivates you. And for me, I just constantly want to be learning and improving. So having a really diverse group of people. Six of us from five different countries with totally different backgrounds that are kind of all complementary to one another. It's just a really exciting environment to be in. Um, the other thing is it's always harder than you think it will be. It's just always found like
so true.
uh, everyone has kind of those, you know, uh, rose tinted glasses when they think about entrepreneurs and founding a company. And even though I've done it before, it's natural, I think. And once you get into it, you're like, oh yeah, this is what the grind is. And it's all worth it, but you have to remind yourself that it's never going to be easy. And that's kind of the difference between who can make it building something out of thin air and who can't.
So true. Yeah, because like on paper, it sounds good. Like, oh, I have to do X, Y, Z to be successful, or I have to switch my sleep schedule. Sounds good. I could do it, but theoretically, that sounds great. When you're actually waking up at those weird times and you're exhausted, and it's the 40th day in a row, like it's hard to push through sometimes. Like, is there anything you're telling yourself to kind of get through some of the harder times?
Yeah, I mean, uh, for me, it's pretty easy because it's like such a compelling vision, and as a team, we're all just so laser focused on that 5 year vision of what Flowly can be and what we can achieve and what we can, what trend we can be on the forefront of. So it's almost like any minute not spent on it is slowing us down or a missed opportunity. So it's again putting yourself in the mindset. It has to be kind of your number one priority going in, and as long as you're motivated and surrounding yourself with the right people, kind of the rest does follow. So not sure if that exactly answers your question. Um,
No, it's
It's
good. It's a hard question to answer, because it's like it depends on the day, but I love that. It's like you guys believe in it so much that you just remind yourself what the goal is and you're able to push through.
yeah, for sure. Um, yeah.
So last question I have for you. You asked me a really good question and I'm going to repurpose it and ask it right back to you when I did yours. But you since we're both Miami Tech founders, seems like you've been here actually a little bit longer than I have. How have you seen the Miami ecosystem change over the years?
It's funny. I asked Vlad this question before hopping on because I've only been here a year, so
Yeah.
it's really not enough time to. I feel like I missed the before times, or I was on the kind of the very tail end of it, because it
Yeah.
sounded like Miami was an absolute, scene during COVID, and there was a lot of, crypto stuff going on, a lot of a flurry of activity more generally. Um, I would say it feels like a city that's very much still growing into itself in terms of the tech scene here. It still feels quite small, but I also really like that about Miami, um, because there are very serious, very hardworking, high achieving people here who are doing amazing things. And because it's like pretty small, it's a very tight knit group, and you get to know those people well. So I definitely think over the next 5, 10 years, it will just continue to grow, and more and more talent will move down here on a kind of continuous basis rather than staying for a year during COVID and moving out.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm excited to see what becomes of it. I love it here, and it feels like a very vibrant, diverse confluence of people of kind of all walks of life, which is what I love most about it.
Absolutely. I was actually surprised by the number of different businesses that were here, not just tech. Like I think it's a really diverse group, and I'm hoping the older, more stable businesses can kind of like keep pushing things along while the tech kind of finds its identity, which I think right now everyone's taking pretty seriously. That it like grew very fast, and now it's trying to grow into its own shirt, I guess you could say, right? It's trying to figure out like what its style is and what it's going to be. So um, that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're a few months ahead of me, but I came a little bit around the same time as you.
Yeah, the feeling that I get, and generally speaking with people who have been here, 10 years, 15 years, is that this is the most active, um, it's been other than those 2 years, which were kind of a blip, right? Um, is kind of the bubble that is reflected in a lot of aspects of society over the past few years. It happened here too in Miami, but the ecosystem has sort of emerged out of it and is stronger than it was pre-pandemic,
Yeah,
overall. So it's definitely an upward trajectory. It's not like all of a sudden like Miami's backslid necessarily. Like definitely don't feel it that way at all. Um,
yeah,
it's just kind of a return to the mean in a sense.
absolutely, absolutely. Well, yeah, that was awesome. I wanted to maybe give you some time to like share anything else that you're working on, anything cool that you want to plug. And then I'd love to hear like where people can find you. Maybe we can link your site and your socials and everything else.
Yeah. you can just visit us at flowlie.com. That's Flowlie with a IE, not a Y. And the only thing I'd plug were we've just launched a series of podcasts. One is the fundraising debrief, and that's basically catching super high performing founders immediately after closing fundraising rounds and hearing from
Oh,
them.
amazing.
It kind of like strips away the you know the again like rose tinted glasses that you see in like TechCrunch of, oh, they raised 10 million from these tier one VCs. Like, why can't I do that? And it gets into the nitty gritty, like, what was the most challenging aspect of the fundraise? How did you go about reaching the right people? Who did you target? Like the actual kind of tactical advice that founders um, can leverage. And then the other podcast is the VC Architects, which is emerging fund managers similarly talking through their journey of their fundraise on, raising from LPs, putting the fund together, what led them to uh, go off and actually embark on that adventure. So um, it seemed to be like a big white space in the sense that these emerging fund managers didn't really have much of a voice. So it's really cool to hear about their experiences as they're at this inflection point in their careers, where they've launched, fund one, in some cases fund two, where
Mhm.
it's really like it's do or die, right? Um, so
Yeah.
so I'd recommend, checking those out. But other than that,
Where can people find them?
yeah. Uh, where can people find them? Good question. Anywhere you get your podcasts. They're on all the
Okay.
Apple Podcasts, Spotify, etc. Um, and they're linked on our website as well.
Amazing. Okay. We'll push them to your website. That's great.
That works.
Awesome. Well, Mark, thanks so much for joining us. This was awesome. Can't wait to see what's next for Flowly. It sounds like you guys are preparing for uh, a public beta, which is super exciting. So we'll try to get people to go to your site and sign up for that.
Yeah, thank you, James. Pleasure speaking with you
Awesome.
again today. I really appreciate it.
Amazing. Awesome. Thanks so much.